Our speaker today is Dr. Paul Wadell. As you can see from his biography, he is Professor Emeritus of Theology and Religious Studies at St. Norbert College in Wisconsin. He is also a very long-time friend of Baylor. He has been here numerous times. He is a specialist in the ethics of Thomas Aquinas, and he lectures and writes on friendship and the role of virtues in the moral life, theology, literature, and the mission of the church in the contemporary world. He serves on the advisory board of the Network for Vocation and Undergraduate Education, NetView. And I will say this, he is not on that board merely because of his remarkable scholarship, but it's truly he is on the board because of his remarkable goodness. He writes on the appeal and goodness of the moral life and the rich blessings of friendship, not only as an academic exercise, but because he is a man who truly embodies these virtues in the lives and in his convictions every day. He is, as I can attest, a friend you do want beside you and whose virtue shines throughout his life. I've told many, many people over the years that someday when I grow up, I do want to be Paul Wadell. And I have yet to achieve that, but it is something I aspire to. Aristotle taught us that we need moral exemplars to know well how to live and how to live well. And Paul Wadell is certainly that. You can see from his numerous books, you see his highlights on the biography. I just want to highlight two of those: Becoming Friends, Worship, Justice, and the Practice of Christian Friendship, and Happiness in the Christian Moral Life and Introduction to Christian Ethics. These are both books I can't recommend highly enough. If you're looking for a book study to do with friends, the Becoming Friends book is excellent. They show the depth of his thinking on friendship and the moral life, but again, not only just how we talk about them, but how we actually live them out. Responding to Dr. Wadell today is Dr. David Corey. Dr. Corey is professor of political science here at Baylor University. He has his home in the honors program, where I am very fortunate to be his colleague. He is also affiliated faculty member in the departments of philosophy and political science. He studied law and jurisprudence at the Old College at Edinburgh before taking up graduate work in political philosophy at Louisiana State University. He is a beloved, and I will say, though, very exacting teacher. I have the privilege of living with 320 honors college students here on campus, and so I hear them talk. And I know he is beloved, and I also know from their talk that he is very demanding of them, requiring critical and careful thinking from their students, calling them to engage deeply with the text they read and to wrestle with the implications of all that they discover there. Baylor Student Government has named him twice Faculty Member of the Year. You see his list of works. He is currently working on Rethinking American Politics and Liberalism in the Modern Quest for Freedom. These books examine the loss of healthy political association in the United States and offer strategies for reform. Our Honors College faculty had the privilege of hearing him speak just a little bit on his work several weeks ago, and I will say the work he's doing fits well with our conference here in the theme of how we have togetherness in an age of discord and the challenges for that. I look forward to his response and conversation with Dr. Wadell. With that said, will you please help me in welcoming Dr. Paul Wadell.
Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to thank Jason for an introduction that was such a gracious and kind gift. And I've gotten to know Jason over the years, and he, along with so many people here at Baylor, are a gift and a blessing to me. Those of you who know me know that I really get hot easily and sweat easily, so I've already taken off my jacket. And that'll help for a few minutes, but I still will be drenched in sweat. Don't worry about that. I just love what I'm doing. But it is great to be back at Baylor. I've been to this conference at least 3 or 4 times. And shortly before I came down on Tuesday, my wife Carmela asked me, "Why do you always say yes when Darren invites you to come to his conference?" And my answer is, well, Darren makes the conference fun. And not surprisingly, she looked a little puzzled, and she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, at Darren's conference," and that's what we call it at the Wadell house, people actually like one another and are friendly with one another. It's an amazing thing. They love to listen to each other and learn from one another. They eat well and they pray well. What more could you ask for? So it's a great gift to be here today. And in the language of the theme of our conference, I think what Darren shows at his conference is that, yes, we might be living in an age of discord, but we don't have to. And that is really the thrust of what I want to share with you this morning. It is surely right that ours is an age of discord, but it doesn't have to be. And that it is an age of discord constitutes for Christians both a call to repentance and a call to once again become the people we were always meant to be. In the letter to the Ephesians, the church at Ephesus is exhorted to live in a manner worthy of the call you have received, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another through love, striving to preserve the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. They are told not to grieve the Holy Spirit of God through bitterness, fury, anger, shouting, and reviling, but rather to be kind to one another, compassionate, forgiving one another as God has forgiven you in Christ. When writing to the Christian community at Galatia, Paul tells them that if they are truly guided by the Spirit, their life together will not be marred by hatreds, rivalry, jealousy, outbursts of fury, acts of selfishness, dissensions, and factions, but will manifest the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These passages affirm that Christians are called both individually and communally to embody, witness, and promote concord, unity, and peace. To be a people of concord, unity, and peace. This morning, I want to show how friendship might help us respond to that call. Although our initial reaction might be that friendships between individuals could not possibly free our society from the grip of discord, conflict, and disunity in which it seems so hopelessly ensnared, I want to suggest that friendship is a powerful counterforce. That friendship is a powerful counterforce because friendships are impossible without concord, unity, and peace. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean that there aren't moments when friends are at odds and grow apart, but it does mean that they must commit to overcoming anything that divides them, because left unaddressed, their friendship will die. Concord, unity, and peace are inscribed in the very being and meaning of friendship. In short, you cannot have a life-giving, lasting friendship without them. That is why friendship can teach us so much about healing a world that is being so sorrowfully torn apart. So I want to explore why this might be true in three ways. First, I'll examine some dimensions of friendship that develop concord, unity, and peace, and suggest how that contributes to a healthy society. Second, I'll consider a more explicitly theological account of friendship by turning to Thomas Aquinas' description of charity as a life of friendship with God that continually unfolds in befriending love of others. And then third, I'll conclude with some brief reflections about how the Church, which is meant to be, in the words of the Second Vatican Council, a sign and an instrument of communion with God and of the unity of the entire human race, how the Church might be called to foster concord, unity, and peace, and thus point the way to the flourishing community that God desires for all people. So that's my intent. I mean, God desires a flourishing community for all people. We're not there. And we're not there because of these forces that are tearing us apart. So how then can friendship form us in Concord unity and peace? Why could we aptly describe friendship as a schooling in Concord unity and peace? There are many ways, but I want to suggest two. First, friendships teach us how to engage with and enter the world of persons who, despite all they may hold in common with us, are not us. A friend, as Aristotle and other ancient philosophers noted, can rightly be called another self because of the deep and resilient intimacy that exists between close friends. However, as the word another reminds us, that friend is also someone irreducibly other than ourselves. That friend is a distinct human being whose identity and story cannot be subsumed into our own, but someone who truly does exist apart from us. Consider how every friendship begins. Friendships are possible only when we are willing to open our lives to strangers. Friendships begin when we make room for strangers in our lives, when we make space for them, and they do the same for us. Nobody is born friends. All our friends were originally strangers to us, as we were to them. The only way they move from being a stranger to becoming a friend is that we made space for them in our lives, just as they did for us in theirs. We did so because there was something about the stranger that drew us to them, something that made us feel a connection with them even before we knew them. And so we risk the hospitality that every friendship requires to begin. Every friendship, when you think of it, begins in a risk of hospitality. But that initial act of hospitality must be sustained and continually renewed if the stranger is to remain a friend. But that isn't easy, because over time, the friend occasionally catches us off guard by reminding us that they differ from us in important ways, and maybe are not as much like us as we initially thought. Perhaps their background and upbringing are more different than we realized, so that what first made them interesting now occasionally creates distance between us. Perhaps their values, convictions, and beliefs do not coalesce as neatly with our own as much as we initially assumed, which sometimes results in misunderstanding and tension. Maybe they make decisions that both baffle and trouble us. Maybe they hurt and disappoint us as we hurt and disappoint them. When this occurs, the once stranger who became a friend is now a stranger again. And when that happens, we are tempted to close off the space and lessen the availability that made the friendship possible. In the life of any friendship, there will be both concord and discord. In the life of any friendship, there will be unity, but also moments of estrangement. In the life of any friendship, there will be peace, but also occasional conflict. That's to be expected. But friendships can only thrive, much less survive, if friends, instead of settling into discord, commit to overcoming it. Precisely because they recognize all that will be lost if they let their friendship die, friends answer the call to concord, unity, and peace, and develop practices for restoring and strengthening concord, unity, and peace. So what might some of those practices be? Discord doesn't stand a chance when friends, rather than becoming defensive, commit to the heartfelt dialogue that consists of patient listening and honest speaking. The heartfelt dialogue that pivots on friends who are humble enough to acknowledge that they might have been wrong and that they have something to learn from one another. Discord becomes much less of a threat when friends, rather than insisting that for the friendship to continue, the other person must see it their way, are mutually willing to be flexible and adaptable, to compromise and to give way to one another. Discord is rendered powerless when friends, rather than drifting away from one another, embody the empathy and the compassion that help them understand and be patient with one another and appreciate that the differences between them, even though they may bring occasional moments of tension and conflict, can also deepen and enrich their friendship and bring increased energy, vitality, and joy to it. I'm sure when I say that, we can all have certain friendships in our lives come to mind. One of the closest friends in my life was a guy named Jim DeManuel, and I thought of him when I wrote that sentence because people used to say that we were so different that the two of us made one interesting person, which we took as a compliment. I think there was some truth to it. But we were really, really different, and sometimes that led to conflict and turmoil. But it undoubtedly, Jim's friendship brought an energy and vitality and joy to my life that would not have been there otherwise. So this, that's why I think there's so many dimensions to speaking of friends as a gift in our life. And discord is happily vanquished and concord, unity, and peace restored when instead of allowing anger, bitterness, and resentment to harden their hearts, friends find healing through confession, forgiveness, and reconciliation. In each of these ways, friends answer the call to concord, unity, and peace. Now, these reflections help us appreciate how friendship, in addition to being indispensable to our personal moral development, might also contribute to a healthy society, one in which the common good is honored and preserved, not neglected and forgotten. Aristotle certainly believed that friendships were socially and politically relevant. When he introduced friendship in Book 8 of his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle said, "Friendship also seems to hold states together, and lawgivers apparently devote more attention to it than to justice." We can only wish that were the case today. Aristotle's claim seems almost laughable today when we think of our political situation, but Aristotle was astute. He understood the importance of friendship for the health of societies, what we might call social friendship or civic friendship, because Aristotle recognized that the concord, unity, and peace that are essential for friendships to grow and to flourish are equally necessary if societies are not to be torn apart by competing interests, proliferating factions, rival power groups, and mistrust and animosity. Good friendships should help make us good citizens. I think there's a strong link there. Good friendships should help make us good citizens because so many of the qualities of character that are acquired in the good friendships of our life form us into the kind of people societies need in order to flourish. As already noted, friendships teach us to appreciate people whose experiences, values, outlooks, and beliefs may be considerably different from our own. And that is exactly the kind of persons societies need in order to overcome the animosity, polarization, and belligerence that is toxic to the unity and peace of any social and political community, precisely because it makes genuine justice impossible. So there's a deep moral argument that I want to push here, that unless we overcome all these forces that are driving us apart, genuine justice is impossible. Why? Because it sabotages community. If we're created for community and the common good, unless we learn to overcome the things that divide us, genuine justice is hopeless. Similarly, if friendships require negotiation, adaptability, and compromise, the same is true with healthy societies. Or if concord, unity, and peace are sustained in friendship through honest speaking and patient listening, along with the willingness to revise one's views, the same is true socially and politically, philosophically and theologically, if we are ever to see those who disagree with us not as enemies to fear, not as people to denigrate and dehumanize, but as unique human beings from whom we have something to learn. And if instead of giving up on one another, friends rediscover the love that allows them to move forward, societies thrive and the common good is achieved when fellow citizens, in a spirit of civic friendship, collectively commit not to allow conflict and dissension to jeopardize the communal well-being that comes from having goodwill toward everyone. In addition to forming us into persons who learn to be in relationship with people who differ from us, a second way that friendships help us answer the call to Concord, unity, and peace is by drawing us out of ourselves in order to care for others for their own sake. In short, friendships pivot on our capacity for self-transcendence. Friendships pivot on our ability and willingness not only to move out of ourselves and into relationship with another, but also to redirect our attention away from ourselves to focus on the true good and happiness of another. This core quality of friendship is expressed in two ways: benevolence and beneficence. Benevolence means to wish well for someone, to be of goodwill toward them, and genuinely to desire what is best for them. But it is not enough just to want another person's good. If we are truly devoted to their good, we actively work to bring it about, which is the meaning of beneficence. As abiding qualities in the life of any true friendship, benevolence and beneficence nurture concord, unity, and peace by teaching us to live for something more than our own gratification and self-interest, which, if we never learn, guarantees the sovereignty of discord and polarization. Pope Francis, in Let Us Dream, The Path to a Better Future, offers what seems like a very simple but crucial insight that can deepen our appreciation of this dimension of friendship. Near the end of Let Us Dream, Francis suggests that the only way the world can find a path to a better future is if all of us decenter and transcend, moving out of ourselves and beyond ourselves, expanding the boundaries of our world by entering more deeply into relationships with others. Instead of seeing this as something that happens only occasionally, Francis suggests that it ought to be the ongoing dynamic of our lives. To be human is to be continuously on call. Inasmuch as we are not to stay put or hold back, and we are especially not to turn in on ourselves as if we are the only thing that matters, which is guaranteed to perpetuate discord. Rather, every day, wherever we are, and no matter whom we encounter, we are called to transcend ourselves in love and compassion. Every day we are called to transcend ourselves in generosity and goodness, in justice and mercy for the sake of others. Every day, whether in our homes, our workplaces and institutions, in our communities and in our churches, we are called to befriend by extending goodwill to others and doing what we can to make things better for them. It's not complicated. There's so many ways that we can extend goodwill to others and do what we can to make things better for them. It doesn't have to be complex. Why does this matter? Pope Francis fears that if we habitually refuse to answer the call to decenter and transcend, we will become people, he writes, incapable of moving outside of their own little world of interest. A comment we should readily appreciate precisely because it gets to the heart of our dilemma. Today, we live in a society that in so many ways not only tells us that it is perfectly acceptable to stay within our own little world of interest, but aggressively encourages us to do so. Is it any wonder that we seem hopelessly mired in discord? Is it any wonder that fragmentation abounds, that our social discourse has become so harsh, self-righteous, ugly, and mean-spirited. When we are formed to value ourselves over others and to approach so many individuals and relationships only in terms of what they can do for us, we should not be surprised that the only thing we hold in common is our collective misery and our deep loneliness. This enduring refusal to move outside our own little world of interest is exactly what Augustine had in mind when he described sin as a turning in on ourselves, so that everything, including God, exists to serve me. Seen in this way, Pope Francis's comment that the discord, animosity, casual cruelty, and polarization that abound in so many places throughout our world are in tune with the work of the devil. His comment seems not far-fetched at all, but exactly right. That benevolence and beneficence contribute to Concord unity and peace in personal friendships is clear. But can they also help us weaken the stranglehold that strife and discord have on our common life today? The philosopher John Cooper wrote that Aristotle held, quote, not only that every person needs to have close personal friendships in which common and shared activities are the core of the relationship, but also that fellow citizens who are not otherwise personally connected ought nonetheless to be disposed to like one another and to wish and do each other well. Now, obviously, Aristotle's world was significantly different from our own, but I think Cooper is right. We cannot be close friends with everyone, but we can adopt a befriending stance toward everyone. We can treat them kindly. We can assume the best of them. We can have goodwill toward them, genuinely care for them, be open and hospitable to them, and affirm their humanity and their dignity and how we look at them, speak to them, and treat them. As Gary Chartier says, at the very least, we ordinarily can and should indeed be friendly. I think Chartier is saying that ought to be the starting point in our stance towards life. At the very least, we can and indeed should be friendly. When he was writing about Concord as one of the chief effects of charity, Thomas Aquinas said that concord is found only in good people and in concerning good things. Friendship provides a natural schooling in concord because, at their best, friendships, particularly what Aristotle called friendships of virtue and character, are about good people and concerning good things. In Book 8 of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle said that friendship is some sort of excellence or virtue, or involves virtue, and it is, moreover, most indispensable for life. I have tried to show why friendship is indeed most indispensable for life, not only for our personal lives, but also for the well-being of the larger society, indeed of the global community. If ours is an age of discord, and we recognize that is not a good place to be, we need in our families, in our churches, and in our educational institutions to emphasize the importance of friendships in developing the moral and spiritual character that is necessary for nurturing concord, unity, and peace. But in addition to noting the importance of friendships, we need to help one another form them. In an age of discord, friendship should be a key component of faith formation in our churches and a key component of the educational mission of colleges and universities, particularly perhaps Christian colleges and universities. If that is so, is there a Christian account of friendship that can enrich our understanding of how friendship is a call to concord, unity, and peace? I think there is in Thomas Aquinas' description of charity as a life of friendship with God that opens in an expansive love and friendship for others. For Aquinas, charity means much more than being cordial and thoughtful and understanding. As Aquinas sees it, charity is not just a particular virtue. Charity is a whole way of life, a whole way of being in the world, characterized by deep and abiding friendship with God, but a friendship that consistently summons us to reach out in befriending love to others. Those two dimensions of love can be distinguished, but they cannot be separated. For Aquinas, to be human is to be in relationship with God and with others. Thus, we who have come from God make our way to God together, loving and doing good, befriending and assisting, as together we move toward God by growing in the love and goodness of God. So how does a life of charity friendship with God call us to Concord unity and peace? The first way is suggested by Aquinas' explanation of how a life of friendship with God begins. Aquinas conceded that for humans to enjoy friendship with God rightly seems totally implausible, because friendship requires a certain degree of likeness and equality, which human beings obviously do not naturally have with God. Left to ourselves, we cannot overcome the staggering disparity between God and ourselves. However, what we cannot possibly do, God can and does. A life of friendship with God, Aquinas explains, begins with God sharing or communicating to us God's own beatitude. It begins with God infusing into our very being the life, love, happiness, and goodness that is God. In other words, from the first moment of our existence, we carry within us the seeds of our absolute fulfillment and perfection. Whether we like it or not, we are teleologically oriented to God, because, whether we like it or not, we are always already participating in the Trinitarian life of God. As the French theologian Jean-Pierre Turel comments, God not only wants us to be happy, he wants us to be happy with the happiness with which he himself is happy, his beatitude. Charity associates us then, Turel continues, with the good already possessed in common by the three persons of the Trinity, in their very life, their happiness, and makes us participate in their eternal exchange. We can begin to glimpse the profound significance of Aquinas' description of what it means for us to have been wholly befriended by God, and how that results in a call to Concord unity and peace. Aquinas is insisting that through charity, we are incorporated into the life of God, a God whose very being is an everlasting communion of love. To speak of God as Trinity is to hold that at the very heart of God, we find not solitude and isolation, but intimacy and community. At the very heart of God, we find the eternally joyous giving and receiving of love. God is a Trinitarian communion of persons, characterized by life-giving mutual love, a communion in which each person's love gives life and identity to the others, which suggests that the love that flows between Father, Son, and Spirit is a kind of friendship. And since there are no failures of love in God, since there are no breakdowns of love in God, and no refusals to give and to receive love, we can say that the friendship that exists within God is a communion of resilient concord, unity, and peace. So what does all that have to do with us? Why are we called to concord, unity, and peace? Because through charity, the concord, unity, and peace that is God is inscribed into our very being. Because through charity, we are forever marked with the concord, unity, and peace of God, and live in and from the concord, unity, and peace that is God. You and I are called to concord, unity, and peace by the befriending love of God, because we are already sharing now however imperfectly and incompletely, in the unblemished Concord unity and peace that is God, and that is the telos and perfection of our lives. Through charity, despite our persistent waywardness, we are blessedly inclined to Concord unity and peace, which means that to live in discord, disunity, and ongoing conflict is to be self-destructively at odds with the gift of God's grace. And what I must stress as a key point is that we can't just resign ourselves to this fragmentation, polarization, and just think, well, that's the way the world goes. To resign ourselves to that is to live in ways that are self-destructively at odds with the deepest and most enduring truth of our nature. That's why fragmentation, discord, and ongoing conflict can't possibly do anybody good. It can't work. A second way to appreciate how charity is inherently a summons to Concord unity and peace is found in Aquinas' comment that in friendship, you love not only your friend, but also, he writes, for the sake of a friend, you love everyone belonging to him, be they children, servants, or anyone connected with him at all, even if they hurt us or hate us. So much do we love our friend. Now, this is where the life of charity gets a little itchy, where we prefer to move on to a more palatable topic. Aquinas says charity compels us to love everyone who belongs to or is connected to God. But he's already told us that everybody is, because God shares the divine life, love, and happiness with everyone, without exception. The truly unnerving challenge at the heart of charity is the call to continually expand, never to shrink or to narrow the circle of love in our lives. The call to resist letting animosity toward anyone ever get the best of us. That ain't easy. But that's the call of charity, to continually push the boundaries of love in our lives, to resist letting animosity and bitterness toward anybody ever get the best of us. Why? Because we cannot claim a life of friendship with God without loving all those who, like ourselves, are loved and befriended by God. This means we must love everybody, even if we'd rather have nothing to do with some of them, because the more we know about them, the more we wonder, what in the world could we possibly have in common with them? The startling revelation of charity is that we do, always have, and always will have something in common with them, something that is far greater, far stronger, far truer, and far more important than anything that might separate us. We just have to sit still and be quiet long enough to get to the heart of the matter. Despite all of our sometimes confounding differences, despite all the tiresome ways we dismiss and exclude, and despite all the forces that drive us apart and tempt us to resign ourselves to seemingly endless discord, the truth is that we are all one. The truth is that we are indissolubly connected because there is one thing that makes every last one of us the same. We are bonded together by the love and mercy of God. Bonded together by the love and mercy of God who created us to flourish and to find life through everlasting, deepening communion with one another. That's the heart of the matter. There's no way around that. As James Joyce wrote in his novel Ulysses, you love a certain person, and this person loves that other person, because everybody loves somebody, but God loves everybody. That God loves everybody helps us understand why Aquinas' account of charity opens possibilities for Concord unity and peace that Aristotle could never imagine. Like Aristotle, Aquinas agreed that every friendship is built around shared goods, and that those shared goods form the basis for Concord unity and peace. But for Aquinas, that shared good is not restricted to free male citizens who desire to pursue a virtuous life together. The shared good bestowed on us through charity makes all of us equal and all of us one. Every person a part of us as we are part of them. The path to Concord unity and peace is found when instead of keeping our sights and our hearts fixed on the often superficial things that aggravate and upset us, that inflame anger and drive us apart, we dare to look into the depths. To look into the depths to find a love that has claimed us, marked us, and won't give up on us, and then have the courage to live according to it. So what does this mean for the church, the community of the friends of God, whose lives are animated, transformed, and redirected by charity? First, two preliminary comments. It's important to remember what the church is. The church is not just another social body, but a people, a community, brought together by God to do the work of God. We see this in the word that the New Testament uses for church, ecclesia. Ecclesia combines two Greek words, ek, which means from or out of, and klesia, which means call. The early Christians saw themselves as a people who had been called out of their individual lives by God in order to be gathered into a community. The church is not like other social groups or communities, because the church is the community that comes into being in response to God's call. To be a Christian is to be called into a community, to be part of a people who have been gathered by God to follow in the way of Christ, to be led by the Spirit in order to do the work of God. Here's the second preliminary comment. A life of friendship with God exists to serve a larger purpose, namely to contribute to the creative and redemptive activity of God in the world by continuing the mission and ministry of Jesus. For Christians, friendship with God leads to mission, because it is about how we as Christian communities are called to do God's work in the world. This is why the life of charity is both a gift and a task. It's a gift because it begins in God's befriending love. It's a task because the gift is a call to mission. We see this in Jesus' farewell discourse as recounted in the Gospel of John. On the night before he died, Jesus addressed his apostles as friends, but immediately went on to say, "It was not you who chose me, but I who chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit that will remain." So Jesus claims us as friends, but then gives us work to do. I've often wished he could have said, I name you friends and let it go at that, but it doesn't stop there. He claims us as friends, but then he gives us work to do. So that means that Christian communities, both denominationally and in their local congregations, must regularly discern how they are being called to continue Jesus' work in the world. Such communal discernment has to be an ongoing practice because we live in different cultures, in different places, and in different times, and face different challenges and circumstances. This is one reason that Pope Francis has called Catholics to embrace synodality as a way of being church. That is especially necessary today. Synod means to walk together or to travel together, and that is how Francis envisions the church. The church is a community of the friends of God who journey together, continually listening for the guidance of the Spirit to discern how God is calling them. The church must be a discerning community. Friendship might aid us in that communal discernment. In a talk that he gave in July 2016, Mark Schwain of Valparaiso University stated that Christ is the truth. He went on to say that if Christian friendships are grounded in the one who is the truth, then as we grow in friendship in Christ and in friendship with one another, we move closer to the truth. In other words, Schwain insisted that for Christians, truth is primarily relational, not propositional. In the life of charities, friends of God discern how God is calling their communities together. They come to a clearer understanding of their collective calling as they listen to how the Spirit speaks through their friends. So how might the Spirit be calling the church to foster concord, unity, and peace in an age of discord? Where might our discernment focus? In Lumen Gentium, the Second Vatican Council's document on the church, the council described the church as the most certain seed of unity, hope, and salvation for the whole human race. Not just for Catholics, not just for Christians, but a seed of unity, hope, and salvation for the whole human race. That's a powerfully captivating and immensely hopeful articulation of the mission of the church, especially in an age of discord. Perhaps discerning together what it would mean for our faith communities to be a most certain seed of unity, hope, and salvation for the whole human race is a fitting place to begin. That same passage continues, established by Christ as a communion of life, love, and truth. The church is taken up by him as the instrument for the salvation of all. Wouldn't embodying in our lives together a communion of life, love, and truth be a compelling response to the discord and polarization of our times? Wouldn't it be audaciously hopeful to call people to a way of life where concord, unity, and peace joyfully abound? So we are back to where we began. Indeed, ours is an age of discord, but it surely doesn't have to be. What I've tried to show is how friendship offers a path out of the dreary discord and enervating polarization that mark our times, by reminding us that we are created not for enmity and animosity, but for communion. That is why any real friendship is a powerful counterforce to everything splitting us apart today. That life-saving truth is even harder to ignore when we answer the call to enter the life of charity. There we discover not only how foolish it is to abide in discord and strife, but more importantly, that this age of discord could dissipate in an instant if we would only let the gift of God's concord, unity, and peace continually mark our lives and our faith communities, hopefully resplendent in who we are and in everything we do. So thank you. Hope that was clear and helpful. And then we're going to, where'd he go? Oh, there you go. Okay. Bye. Thank you.
I'm going to move this out of the way, and they're going to have a conversation first and some dialogue, and then we'll open up for questions.
Either maybe give him a chance to answer a few questions one by one, so you could focus on them. I want to first of all say thank you for your rich and very generous paper, and it was a delight to hear you read it, because I read it in my voice, and now I've heard it in your voice, and that embodied your arguments for me in a way that was delightful. And I want to say that the three things that I'm basically in agreement with the three main things you do in the paper. One is to argue that friendship provides a schooling in Concord, Concord Unity and Peace, and I couldn't agree more. I think it does. And you don't call it this, but you offer a very compelling phenomenology of friendship when you talk about us starting as strangers and being drawn and interested and taking risk. And I thought that I haven't seen that phenomenology before, and I was attracted to it. I want to thank you for taking the time to think through that. And then you offer a theology of friendship in relation to the Trinity. And I'm not a theologian, but I was completely in agreement with that. I'm a political theorist, and some of my questions will reveal that tendency in my thinking. One of the things I wondered if I could draw you out on is that you're making an audaciously hopeful political argument, in fact. You frame your paper that ours is an age of discord, but it need not be. It surely need not be. I wondered, since the paper is so optimistic, if you would help us acknowledge some limits to the power of friendship to address this political problem.
That's a great point, David. I guess for me, as well, I'm in my 70s. There's no reason to hide that. And one thing I've discovered as I've gotten older, my view of the world changes, and at times, honestly, I can be deeply pessimistic about everything, which is why I want to push hope, because I can't allow myself to kind of sink in that bog of pessimism and eventual despair. But I guess I don't see this. I see this a difference between being optimistic and being hopeful. Optimism to me is more of it can be a personality trait. It can be, on certain days I can be optimistic, other days I don't. I think hope is much more an abiding characteristic of our being that we require one another to sustain. So part of it is a theological argument. I think God gives us reasons to hope, but I also believe that we can't live without it. I mean, that I've told people this before I retired, when I was still teaching, whenever I knew a class I was losing the students' attention, which happened frequently enough. So you always had, things to pull out of the bag to get, and there were 3 topics that always got their attention: friendship, forgiveness, and hope. And I was struck by that, and I think a lot of it was, they may be encouraged to be optimistic, but not necessarily hopeful. Now, in saying that, I don't believe hope is at all easy. That's why I see it as both a gift of God's grace, but also as a virtue. We have to work at it, we have to develop it, we have to continually grow in it by what I call practices of hope. And to me, so, if hope is really an abiding characteristic of a person, they're not hopeful one day and despairing the next. But I think the challenge is, and this gets to your question on friendship, where do we find the communities and relationships that make that possible? And that's where I think you could push. Is this all just utopian? My response to that is, I deeply hope it isn't.
Well, let me pick up on that, because it does strike me at several places in the paper that the hope you're describing here is a hope in changing the world. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that's the right place to put hope. I mean, I have hope too, but I don't believe the world will be saved, mm-hmm. and I don't believe you and I can save it, and so, or even the church. Mm-hmm. It seems that Jesus, in saying that his kingdom is not of this world, is asking us to place our hope in something that transcends our earthly struggles, which I don't imagine are going away. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think, I certainly don't want to give the impression that we can save the world. I think don't even try. Besides, it's kind of idolatrous. But I do think, God saves the world, but we're not just called to sit back and watch it happen. And that's where I want to link hope to justice. I mean, I touched on that at times in the argument, but I think hope is, Aquinas said that hope is a kind of empowering virtue that enables us to achieve other great goods. And for me, some of the things that happen, I think, is that we can kind of resign ourselves. Well, there's always going to be injustice. There's always going to be discrimination. There's always going to be sexism or racism or whatever. What can we do? And I think hope is saying there's a lot we can do, taking in our limitations and all of that. But every day I can make a dent in the things that drive us apart simply by how I interact with another person. Now, to bring it, there's limitations to friendship, but I also think there's extraordinary power to friendship. Because C.S. Lewis said that sometimes when you meet a friend, you think it's only me that sees the world a certain way and thinks things are really bad. You see a friend and says, "Oh, you too." So now I'm not alone, and that friendship can grow. So yeah, I think this is not at all easy, but to me, there's a much greater cost if I just say it's not easy, so don't try.
My second question is also a bit of a sed contra, a yeah, but, and so and I'll pick up on what you just said. You're inclined to press the power of friendship. Let me mention some of its limits and have you comment. Maybe I don't know if we would meet in the middle or if you would just press on. But I've often been struck that we can't practice friendship fully the way we should, and for two reasons. One is our finitude, and it is actually exhausting to love someone, especially because when it's real, when that person suffers, you suffer. When that person isn't right, you're not right. And here we are, we have our calling and our things to do. If we multiply our friends too much, it's impossible to go about our lives. So we're actually psychologically limited in how many friends we can have. And then I think it's even worse because I think even in our closest friendships, there remains a vexing ontological gap between us that really can't be bridged. I wish it could, but do you think I'm speaking the truth when I say, strangely, no one seems to be able to love me enough the way I really need to be loved, because we're all also selves, and even when we wish the good of the other person, we wish the other good of the person bracketed in a way that we seem to reserve a self here. And so I mean, I recognize in your paper that you do see that there are different kinds of friendship, and you talk about civic friendship as less demanding. It's just sort of an openness towards the possibility of goodwill and so on. But I wonder, so this isn't connected to your main argument that friendship will save us. I'm not making a political argument here. I'm actually asking, would you wish to acknowledge any limits to the power of friendship, not in saving the world, but just in ourselves, as a matter of fact? Aren't we also fallen in our friendships permanently so?
Yeah, I'm not only will meet you in the middle, I'll come over there. I think the one thing I just quickly, I don't think friendships will save us, but friendships will form us in hopeful ways. But you're absolutely right. I mean, that, Aristotle, I didn't get into this, but Aristotle talked about there's different kinds of friendships. And for him, the truly fullest form of friendship is what he called friendships of virtue and character. But he admitted, we can only have so many relationships of that kind in our life for the very reason you're saying. We're finite, we're limited. Friendships require presence and time of us. We can't do that equally with everybody. But it's interesting when he talks about two other kinds of friendships, friendships of usefulness and friendships of advantage. He sees them as lesser forms of friendship, but they still have an important value, because in those friendships, they might not be the key relationships of my life. They may not last forever, but I'm still called to exhibit goodwill towards somebody. So, but I think that's right. I mean, we can't, in no way do I want to say we can have these kinds of sort of paradigm friendships with everybody, for the very reasons that you're saying.
I'll end with another question that has a political flavor, and then I'll stop, because I really want to hear everybody else's questions too. I want to turn your thesis on its head, and then it starts to look like a thesis I have. I just wanted to see what you think about this. Good friends can make good citizens, is your argument. Bad citizens will make bad friends, is my argument. And the reason that makes sense to me is that we're caught up in a view right now that politics is so important. And we're in a culture war. And politics is an extrinsic good, it's an instrumental good. We're trying to use politics and the people we encounter in order to win victory and accomplish certain ends. When politics becomes hegemonically important, and the view is that our relationship to other people is instrumental, friendship is impossible. What you'll see is allyship, or some kinds of use relationship where when you stop agreeing with me politically, I stop being your friend because you just stopped being useful to me. And it seems to me until we get, I mean, this is probably going, we're both right here, I think, but I think until we address the way we understand what politics is, your desire for more robust forms of friendship is going to stumble.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, and to me, it's also not reflecting on what we understand politics to be, but also what do we understand friendship. You know, if my friendship is based on you better think the way I do about my politics, it's not a friendship. It's
Right.
coercion. You know, it's manipulation. But I think that's. I mean, the other point I think, David, is so key to what you're saying. One of the reasons I want to push friendship is that I think friendship calls our attention to things that are far more interesting than important than political affiliation.
So you might say, and this I do say, when I think about friendship, if you can actually achieve friendship with somebody, it's good for politics because you just realize something more important than politics.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Politics is not all important.
It's not really as important as we let it be, or we make
It's not even
it.
as important as baseball.
Yeah.
Let's turn it open to you. What questions would you like to ask? We'll start here in the front.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much.
When my kids were younger, we used to frequent a small German bakery in Vernon, Texas, and every time we go there, it was the same table of old guys sitting there every Saturday morning, and it made me wonder if I was going to have a table of old guys when I grew up. And so I want to turn the question then, how much is friendship a means or a solution to discord, compared with discord being a symptom of us not pursuing friendship as an end?
Can you say it again, Brent? I'm sorry. I
So
didn't.
friendship being a means or a symptom or a solution to discord, compared with discord just being the symptom of us not pursuing friendship as an end in itself.
I think it could be both, really. I mean, I think that part of our discord, I mean, the best friendships, I think, are rooted in the most substantive and important goods. And I think a lot of the discord we have reflects a trivialization of our lives. You know, we don't know what we live for. You know, it's hard to say what's the glue that holds this friendship together. And if it's something, if it's something that ultimately is not nearly important as we're making it to be, it's not going to be strong enough to sustain community. And I think that's the problem. I mean, we need communities, but we also need to be able to identify what are the goods, or what are the narratives that make genuine, life-giving community possible over time. So part of this, I mean, we didn't really address on it, I think is also a question of narrative. What are the narratives that are driving our society and our culture today that actually might undermine both community by, almost inclining us to discord and polarization. I mean, an example of it for me is, I mean, like all of us, I'm struck at times by how many people, when something doesn't go their way, their emotional reaction is, I'm enraged. Mm-hmm. Now, I think we should be enraged about some things, but not every little thing that irritates me or, gets in the way of what I want to do. But to me, it's a reflection of, again, what holds our life together. And in many ways, I think it's like a series of distractions that can upset us, please us, or whatever, but it's not enough to sustain a friendship. So I think both things are true in what you're saying. But it calls, the reality of the age of discord, I think, calls for deep reflection of what's at the bottom of this. I kind of looked at as a way out of it, but I think also equally important, what's going on that, because as I said, I think the only thing it results in is collective misery and deep loneliness. Well, who wants that? There's got to be a better way, to go about life.
Ian, I think you're here.
Paul, it's been a privilege and an honor to know you these many years and hear you speak on the value and importance of friendship all this time. Thank you. My question is, so a mathematician and an engineer walk into a lecture on friendship in a Christian university, and they hear the lecturer say that it would be valuable and important to teach friendship at the university. Mm-hmm. And they think that sounds great, but how do we do that? Mm-hmm. And I know you've thought about this a lot, so I wondered if you could share some of your maybe more practical thoughts about how friendship is in some sense taught in the educational system.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ian. One thing, and I really, I kind of threw that out there is when you retire, you can give a lot of challenges to people who are still working. But yeah. But I threw it out there because I really believe. I mean, as Jason mentioned, I've been involved with Nephew, and some in this room have also been involved with Nephew, and I think it's one of the most hopeful things in higher education today. If you don't, Nephew is NETVUE, and it stands for Network for Vocation and Undergraduate Education. And basically, I think Nephew is calling us to re-envision what are we called to do in education? What is the mission, or not just what are we individually called to do in higher education, but what are our institutions called to do? And I think it would be a really fascinating discussion, and even though I've been retired 4 years, I still have dreary memories of faculty meetings. And I would love to have, could an educational institution have a conversation of how can we become a communal of friendship? Now, I don't mean that in a kind of pious sense, but for each person in their area of a college or university to think, what would that mean for me? So I would say to a physics professor or an engineer or a math professor, think about how you're present in the classroom. I mean, friendship is a matter of being present to one another. Friendship is a matter of beholding the other, letting them know that you recognize them and respect them. I mean, so even a befriending stance is an act of love. Now, it doesn't require that I have to tell you, just so you know, this is an act of love. But I think over 16 weeks of a semester, students will pick up that message because everybody hungers to be recognized. So that's what and I think, that's what people remember. I mean, it's a long time since I graduated. I remember basically nothing, from my classes, but I sure do remember people who I felt saw me, and that's what I think is so important, because I think a lot of people today do not feel seen. And love is a matter of visualizing the other person. And so the language of friendship, it can sound really easy to have goodwill towards another. But I think there's a lot of people who seldom experience that. So to me, it's how do you answer a question? How do you respond to an irritating student in a way that manifests goodwill? But I think to me, that would be a fascinating conversation to kind of reflect on what does this call us to do, so that we're not just teaching a subject, we're teaching a hopeful way of being in the world. And we need that. Anybody can teach a subject, but not everybody can teach a hopeful way of being in the world.
I have a question about national media and local friendships. And you've probably heard this term echo chamber. So I probably live in an echo chamber. I have a friend who I think lives in another echo chamber. And there are some topics, especially since the election of 2016, that we cannot agree about, even about the nature of truth. We can't agree about it. And sometimes our interactions get very heated, and I don't know what to do about this echo chamber phenomenon. Should I listen to his news sources? Should he listen to my news sources? It is, I really appreciate your talk. I remember hearing during the election of 2016 that families were torn apart by what happened. So if that's the case, how much more friendships can be threatened? But I really appreciate what you've spoken about. I just wondered if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I would love to hear what others how would respond to your question. I think sometimes I found that in my life sometimes that I can get so caught up in things that begin to take over my life that I don't even see what's happening, but other people see it. And so sometimes I think it's important to step back and just to say to one another, what are we doing to ourselves? What's happening to us? Whether it's in families or institutions or in relationships, we're doing a pretty good job of destroying ourselves. Do we really want to do that? So I think, that part of friendships are not about always making one another feel good and letting things just go by. Anybody can do that, but I think friendship requires a kind of gritty honesty to step back and say sometimes, we had something good here and we're killing it. What are we doing to ourselves? And because otherwise, I think, there's a theologian named James Keenan who teaches at Boston College, and I love his description of sin. He said, sin is simply not bothering to love. And that has stayed with me, and I think sometimes I can get so caught up in my beliefs, my views, my predilections, that I'm not bothering to love. And especially if my fundamental aim is to win, to prove that I'm right, I'm not bothering to love. So it might sound like a basic answer, but I think that's a moral call to us, is to live with enough reflection, whether it's in our faith communities, whatever, is to say, what are we doing to ourselves? And to really encourage, that kind of questioning.
Seated.
Yes, I wanted to ask, to what degree do you think friendship is going to be possible for someone who does not embrace sort of broadly Christian views of humanity and such? Because you talked about Aquinas' hope, but of course that's a theological virtue.
Mm-hmm.
That's a distinctly Christian hope. There's a lot of people in our culture who don't think we're really integrated, but instead we're just sort of radically individualistic automatons, and we all pluralistically get to choose our own meaning. So to what degree can we hope reasonably for people without sort of broadly Christian views to embrace these friendships?
I think quite a bit, and I'll say that, maybe qualify it a little, that, what Aquinas, I think, is casting, the community of charity for Aquinas has no borders, has no walls, because God loves, he bases this basically on, I think it's Romans 5:5, the grace of God is poured into our hearts. It doesn't say just to a few, it's to everybody. So Thomas would say, and that's why I kind of put in there, whether we like it or not, or know it or not, we're in this together. Now, if I, have some, and basically I think a life of charity calls us to try to connect with everyone who's put on the path alongside us. Now, to do that well, I have to have the kind of humility that allows me to see another person clearly. So I'm not imposing my sense of who I want you to be. I might offer that, but I let them be. And when that happens, I think there can be really deep bonds of friendship. Now, it's going to be different from a friendship with someone who I know sees their life in a Christian framework, sees themselves as a disciple. But at the same time, not only can I connect with them, but they can connect with me, and I can learn from them. They can open up my world. And that's, that line from James Joyce. The hardest thing about that talk was, I haven't read James Joyce in a long time, was paging through Ulysses and saying, please, but I found it. But I like that line where, everybody loves somebody, but God loves everybody. And what does it mean for us to try to do the same? It's going to be very personal in terms of who that other is, which ain't easy. The person I'm called to love really deeply is my wife, Carmela. It's really hard sometimes for both of us because, the friend is another self, but truly another, and we're very, very different. But she's the neighbor put on the path alongside me, So I think what what happens in friendship, I mean, in a way it's easier with somebody who's not Christian, because we know from the get-go what makes them other. What's harder, I think, sometimes is the people we think we have so much in common, and then we realize, there's differences here, and how do we learn to allow those differences to be a gift rather than a threat? I think that's the challenge. If the difference predominates as a threat, the game's over, because communion is not possible. If we search for ways to allow the gift to triumph over the threat, there's hope. I think the problem now is we don't try. And that's what I say. This is hard.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation and multi-layered themes and spheres. That's beautiful. If we are human, then we have something in common, and we can discover that. And if you want to discover the difference, is one attitude. Discover the treasures is another attitude. I'd like to add a couple of comments, if you don't mind. Friendship, true friendship, requires honesty, transparency, and disclosure, and ends up hopefully in bonding. And there's some, as you said, different types of friendship: general friendship, special friendship, and intimate friendship, as I put it personally. And I would like to add that beside cultivating our friendship and appreciation to God, to nature, to the universe, to others of all time, I would like to add the art of cultivating friendship with ourselves. Because when I'm a good friend with myself, I'm at ease with myself when I'm alone and when I'm with people. I don't have the frustration, and it will be equal, nurturing and being nurtured. Otherwise it will be a burden of some sort. So there is this beautiful cultural, psychological, and spiritual dimension to that.
Yeah, to me, one of the gifts of a good friendship is that it teaches us to love ourselves well. Because friends know us through and through. Initially we can kind of hide the unpleasant aspects of ourselves, but you can't do that over time. And when you asked the question, it reminded me there's a philosopher, Joseph Pieper, who's dead, but Pieper basically said to love somebody is to let them know that it's good that they exist. You're glad they're alive. And I think, when the gospel calls us to love God, neighbor, and ourselves, if we recognize that, what that means, we ought to be glad that we're alive. The party wouldn't be the same without you. And I think that's what love communicates, to another person, is to let them know you matter enough. The party wouldn't be the same without you. Now, so love, what I think this is pushing, love is a powerful thing, because love is essentially the power to create. To befriend somebody is the power to draw them more fully to life. But to hate somebody, to denigrate them, to dismiss them, is going to just squeeze the life out of them. It's like, have you ever been in a place where you know you're not wanted? You feel like you're starting to disappear. When you're loved, you're seen, you're welcomed, you have this sense of belonging. So there's so many different levels to this, but I think that, it's hard for me to communicate to another person in all my, my glances, my attitudes, my feelings, that I'm glad they're alive, unless somebody's letting me know that as well about my own existence. So, friendship there's a mutuality here. I think that's the key, where it gets back to David's point. We're finite, we have needs, we're human. And, that's why when I talked about God, it's not just the giving of love, it's the receiving of love. It's got to be both.
I did have a question. As people change over time, somebody that is a friend at one point in your life might not be the best person to be in your life a little bit later on. And if you try to preserve a friendship just for the sake of it being a friendship, then you're making friendship an idol almost, as opposed to recognizing that sometimes it's better to step back and maybe let somebody else be that friend and you move on. Do you have a comment on that, or do you think you should always try to be a friend to everybody at all times?
I think our starting stance should be we should try. I mean, to have what I call like that, to adopt a befriending attitude, stance towards other people. But you're absolutely right. I mean, friendships do die. And there are times when, I mean, friendships have to be marked by mutual goodwill and some kind of shared good. And if that no longer exists, it doesn't serve friendship well to continually to use that language.